Hey everyone, it's Lisa. Thank you so much for joining me today. In today's video, I'm going to be working with Queen & Company's Holiday Jar Shaker Kit. And this kit is perfect for Christmas cards, it's perfect for your winter cards, and I had so much fun working with this kit. You guys know how I love to make shaker cards. I also love Christmas cards, so this is a perfect combination. So I did make some cards. This is a 10 card one kit video. However, there's actually 8 cards. There's a tag, and then there's also a jar-shaped ornament that I made, which I personalized by putting my kid's picture inside. And here's a picture of that ornament. So make sure you stay tuned on how to make that. So here's a look at everything that's in the kit. I did do an unboxing video. I will link to that down below if you want to check out that video. But just real quick, there are 44 steel dies. There's a 6x6 paper pad. There's a 4x6 stamp set. You also get the foam pieces to make the jar. You get the acetate covers, and you get some shaker pieces. I will have a coordinating blog post with detailed pictures and card measurements on my blog, and it's at www.lisamearsdesigns.com, and I will link to that down below. So for this first card, I went ahead and die cut some of the Christmas trees, the sleigh, as well as the jar top. I also took this die, it's a border die, and die cut a white cardstock border to represent snow at the bottom of my jar. You did see me inking up the edges of these dies. So the Christmas tree I just inked up with some green ink on the edges just to add some texture there, just to make it look more dimensional. I also inked up the sleigh as well as the lid of the jar in some gray ink. So that red and white snowflake paper was cut with that jar die that's there at the bottom left hand corner of the screen, and I just adhered the Christmas tree and the snow to that snowflake paper. And then I'm going to go ahead and position the sleigh on there and glue that down. And then I'll add the foam jar shaker piece to the top of that snowflake paper. And that foam piece does have double-sided adhesive on both sides, so I just peeled back the backing and stuck it down. I added some of the shaker toppings inside, and then I cut the outline die out of just some white cardstock that will go right on top. But before I do that, I am going to ink up the edges with some light gray ink just to add some dimension to that jar. And then I'm going to go ahead and take the piece of acetate that comes in the kit. Now these acetate pieces are already pre-cut for you, and then just peel back the top backing, adhesive backing off of that foam, add the acetate directly to the top. I did notice that some of the pieces were sticking to the acetate, so I just peeled it right back up, put those pieces, shaker pieces, right back in that jar, and then I just took my powder tool and put some powder over it, and then added that piece of acetate right back to the top of that jar. And then just put some glue on the back of the outline piece and added that directly over the acetate, and then added the lid to that jar. There are 2 dies for handles for the jar. There's a smaller one and a little bit wider one, and it says in the pamphlet that came with the kit that the smaller handle is designed to fit the original tall jar from the Love Jar dies from Queen & Company. This kit also contains some taller Christmas trees and a taller candle that will fit in the taller jar from the original Love Jar kit. That tag is from the Queen & Company's Foundation 1 die set, and I just stamped out one of the labels from the stamp set, and I'm just adding some of the leaves, and then this is just a little bow embellishment that I had in my stash from Queen & Company, which I'm not sure if it's on the website. I tried looking for it on the website. I originally didn't find it on there, but I'll look again, and if I see it on there, I will link it down below. So I added the tag to the side of the jar, and then I also die cut this scallop that's from the Queen & Company's Foundation 5 die set and stamped out Merry Christmas. I also used some of these curvy borders from Queen & Company and die cut some snowy borders to add to the bottom of this cardstock. So this red and black plaid cardstock is measured at 4 by 5 1/4. And then I go ahead and add those borders there. I add 2 borders because I want it to look like dimensional snow, multi-layers of snow there at the bottom. I also cut this green and white striped paper, and it measures 4 by 3/4 inches. And I'm just going to add that scallop to the top of the card layer. And here I'm just adding some foam. I'm just using the extra foam pieces from the Queen & Company kits. Save all those extra foam pieces because you can definitely use them in cases like this. Just adding them there to the bottom of the tag and the top of the lid, just so that when I add this jar to the cardstock, the entire backside fully adheres to that card layer. So I'm adding that entire layer to a piece of black cardstock from my stash. It measures 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. I do add a few of these red rhinestone dots on the front of the card, and then I add this entire layer to an A2 size card, which measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Next, I'm going to take some glue and just apply some glue to the snowy hillside borders that are on the front of the card, and then I'm going to take some chunky glitter and just add it to the top of that glue. I wanted it to look like there was snow at the bottom, so I thought that adding this chunky glitter would do the trick. So that completes my first card. For my next card, I'm going to incorporate some of the gingerbread men. So I'm showing you how to put one together. There are 2 dies for the gingerbread man. You have your solid die on the left, which I die cut out of the white cardstock. That will represent whatever color frosting you want to have on your gingerbread man. And then the die on the right, I die cut out of just some craft cardstock, and that will layer right on top. And to finish him off, I'm using some light brown ink and inking up the edges to make him look nice and toasty. So there's the gingerbread man. I'm also using these candy dies. So I have this solid and then these 2 layering dies for the top. There are 2 different style candy pieces. So the solid I cut out of white, and then the top piece I have a green one and a red one, and just adding ink to the back and adding them to the back of the white cardstock. So those represent little candy pieces or peppermints. And then I have the candy cane. That one also has 2 dies. You have your solid, which I die cut out of the white, and then the top layering piece, which I die cut out of the red, and just layering those on top. So here's the dies that I'm going to be using. I have my outline die for the jar, which I die cut out of some white cardstock, and I'm just adding some gray ink to the edges just to add a little bit of dimension and texture there to the edges of that. And then I have the solid background piece from the jar. I die cut out of some white cardstock. And then I also have the lid, which was die cut out of a light gray cardstock. And I'm adding some light gray ink to the edges of that as well. So here I wanted to make it look like these gingerbread men are falling out of the jar. So I'm just positioning them how I want them to appear in the jar. There's also a die there, which is for gumdrops. And I did die cut a couple of gumdrops out of red and green cardstock. So you can see I'm just placing all of the candies and the gingerbread men inside that jar. And then there is one that I'm going to have partially in the jar and partially out of the jar, and I'll just add him there as well. I'm also using some Nuvo glitter drops and just adding some of that onto these gumdrops. I wanted it to look like they had sugar on them, and you will need to let that dry before you add any shaker bits to this jar. So I went ahead and used my heat tool just to speed up the drying time. So next I took the foam piece for the jar, peeled back the back side of the double-sided backing. I did add some glue to it just for some extra security because I have all those cardstock pieces, especially that one that's coming outside of the jar. I just wanted to make sure that it was really strongly adhered to that jar. So I found these peppermint candy shaker pieces in my stash. These are from the candy toppings that Queen & Company sells, and I will put a link to that product down in the description box below. I also added some of the green shaker toppings from the kit. And then I just added the acetate to the top of the jar. And then I'm just adding glue to that outline portion of the jar and adding that directly to the top of the acetate. I die cut a banner out of black cardstock. That is from the Foundation 2 die set from Queen & Company, and I just snipped off the right side of that banner just so that it has a straight edge. And then I'm going to stamp out using the Versamark ink the sentiment that says Sweet Christmas Wishes. And then I'll add some white embossing powder to the top of that, and then I will melt that embossing powder using my heat tool. Next, I have this green solid cardstock from my stash, which measures 5 3/8 by 4 1/8, and this striped red and white paper from the kit, and that's 5 1/4 by 4, and I adhere those two together. Next, I have this border die from Queen and Company's Foundation 7 dies. Die cut that out of white cardstock, and I'll add that to the front of the card. I also took the same die and die cut this green with white polka dot pattern paper so I can cut the inside out and add that right to the center of that frame. Next, I'm going to start positioning all of these little pieces, including the jar, how I want it to look inside that frame. So I have the jar leaning downward, like the pieces are falling out of the jar, and then I have the lid placed at the very bottom of that frame. Went ahead and positioned everything how I want it to look, and then I'll start adhering everything down. You can see where I positioned the sentiment banner up towards the top, and now I'm just going to glue everything down onto the card. And then once I have all those pieces down, I'm going to glue that entire layer onto an A2 size card base, which measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I am also going to add with a glue dot a small green bow to the top corner of that jar. And that completes this card. For my next card, I cut the jar background layer out of red and then the top outline layer out of the red pattern paper from the kit. I'm going to use this cake die, and I cut that out of a dark brown, and then the topping out of like a cream color cardstock, and then the cake stand out of a light gray color cardstock. And I'm just going to glue all of these pieces together to form this cake. And then I'll start adding them to that background layer of the jar. I just rest that outline border over top of the jar just to make sure that my placement when I glue that cake down is placed centered and not too far down on that jar. I'm also going to add a leaf to the top, and I will end up using a white gel pen just to add some lines to that leaf. And once I have that all set, I will take the foam piece out, take the backing off, add it to that jar shape, and then I will add some shaker pieces inside. I am using the clear as well as the green little crystals. I will use my powder tool on the acetate so that the crystals do not stick to it, and then I will add the acetate to the top of that jar. I will add the red outline to cover the acetate, and then I die cut the jar lid out of some silver foil paper that I had in my stash. Add that to the top, and then I also die cut the tag that's from the Foundation 1 die set, and I stamped out a sentiment that says Mrs. Claus Gingerbread Bakery Cookies, Pies, Figgy Pudding. Stamp that out in some green ink. And then I'm just adding some of these leaves. I did ink up the edges of those green leaves with some green ink just to add some dimension to those. And I'm just using some double-sided tape on the back just to hold those leaves down. And then I'm just going to put some glue there as well. I'm using some twine from my stash to wrap around the lid of the jar. I'll snip off the ends, and then I'll just tie it in a knot in the back. Next, I added a glue dot to the circle on the tag, and I added a bow that I tied out of twine, and then I'm just going to add that to my lid. So I'm just tracing here with a pencil where I want that lid to go, and I'm adding glue everywhere to the left of that pencil mark, and then adding that tag to my jar. So to put this card together, I have a piece of solid red cardstock from my stash that's 5 3/8 by 4 1/8. The green with the white dot paper is 5 3/8 by 3 1/2. And I have a scallop die, and that is from the scallop border dies from Queen and Company. I die cut 2 of them out of some silver foil cardstock from my stash. And I put 1 scallop at the top and 1 at the bottom. And then I have this scallop border die that is from Foundation Dies 7. I die cut that out of white cardstock, and I'm adding that to the center of the card, and then adding this entire card layer to an A2 size white card base. My jar will go right in the middle of that scallop, but before I adhere it, I'm going to go ahead and add some foam so that the entire jar with the tag lies flat to my card front. So I'm just adding some foam to the tag and to the top of the jar lid, and then I'll remove the backing, add some glue, and add that to my card. Next, I'm going to add a few red gems to the front of the tag. And then on the inside, I'm going to stamp out a sentiment that says, "Hoping your Christmas is the sweetest ever." And that will complete card 3. Next up, I decided to make a tag that you can use to add to a Christmas gift bag or a Christmas present. So these are the dies that I'm using. I have starting on the left, I have that large banner die. That's going to be the base of my tag. That is from Foundations 2 die set. I die cut that out of some craft cardstock and just inking up the edges there in some light brown ink just to add some dimension there to that banner. And then next I have this other banner. It's a medium-sized banner. That's from the Foundations 4 die set. I die cut out of some red pattern paper. And then I have these 2 scallops, one larger one and one smaller one. The larger one is die cut out of a piece of white cardstock and the smaller one out of the green with white polka dot paper. Those scallops are from the Foundation 1 die set from Queen & Company. So I'm just layering the scallops onto each other and the banners onto each other, and then I'm going to go ahead and add the foam piece from the jar directly to the scallop. I also die cut several of the peppermint pieces out of the white and red solid cardstock from my stash. I'm adding a few glued down to the back side of the jar, and then a couple will just be floating freely inside of that jar as shaker pieces. I also added some shaker pieces into that jar. I used the pearl toppings, which are round pearls. Those are extra and can be purchased on Queen & Company's website. And here I'm just trying to figure out what color top I want for my jar. I did have a red one, a gold one, and a silver one die cut just to kind of see what I wanted to use. I do end up using the silver one. I thought that one looked the best. And here I'm trying to figure out what type of embellishment I want to add to the top corner of the jar, whether I wanted to put the leaves on here or whether I wanted to include a bow. There is a bow die that's included in this kit. And in the end, I decide to go with a green bow for my jar. I do use a white gel pen just to add some accent lines to the bow, and I do add a red epoxy dot gem to the middle of that bow. And I'm going to go ahead and add that to the top right hand corner of that jar. I use a small banner die from the Foundations 2 die set and stamp out Sweet Christmas Wishes onto some white cardstock. I also die cut a green banner because I'm going to incorporate both colors. One is the green one's just going to be an accent piece behind the white one. So here I'm adding the scallop to the middle of the tag. I'm going to go ahead and add the green banner up close to the top of that jar so that the jar looks grounded, and then I'm going to add the white one slightly below the green one. And then I also have some of these gingerbread men. I'm going to include one on the left and right. Notice that the frosting this time is green cardstock for the background, so you can basically make these gingerbread any color you want just by changing up that background layer to add a different color frosting to your gingerbread man. I add a few of the red little rhinestone gems to each side of the sentiment on the banner. And I'm going to be bringing in an eyelet. This is from the We Are Memory Keepers eyelet pack in the neutral colors. So I take my Crop-a-Dile, just punch out a hole here, drop the eyelet in, and then I set it with my Crop-a-Dile. If you don't have these tools, you can just take a hole punch and you can just punch a hole there in the top and then just string your ribbon right through your hole punched tag. So here I'm going to go ahead and include 2 layers of ribbon. I have a dark green and a red. Matches the same colors there that I have in the cardstock on the tag, so I just layered those up, and then I'm just going to tie these in a knot. And then of course on the back side is left plain, so you can write your to and from message on the back. And here's a closer look at the tag itself, and then here's a closer look at the tag on a gift bag. For my next card, I'm using these pine cone dies. The pine cone dies come in a top layer and then the bottom layer. The top layer I die cut out of dark brown cardstock, and I'm just using this pokey tool just to poke out these little cutouts in this die cut, and that's just going to add some dimension to your pine cone. And then the bottom layer, the solid, I die cut out of a craft cardstock, and I'm just going to layer these two together. There is a smaller pine cone, which is the one I've used. There's also a larger pine cone die in this set, which is identical. And then I'm also going to be incorporating this larger candle, which I die cut out of this red cardstock, and then the flame I die cut out of some yellow cardstock. I also have this leaf die, and I die cut 2 green leaves, and I'm inking up the edges in some green ink. And then I have the lid, which I die cut out of the same green cardstock, and I'm inking up the edges with green ink on that. And then the candle will have some red ink added to that. And then the top of the jar, the outline piece, is just out of some white cardstock with some gray ink added. And then the background piece I die cut out of that green swirl pattern paper from the kit. And this particular jar is not going to be a shaker. So you can see that I added the outline piece directly to the background piece of the jar, and then I'm going to go ahead and add the candle, starting with the bottom of the candle and then adding the flame, and then I'm going to add these 2 leaves, one on each side, and the pine cone will be in the middle. Now I do want to mention, when you add the leaf on the right, you will have to turn it over and use the reverse, which it's the same color on both sides, so you really can't tell that it's the reverse because there's only one of these dies that's going in one direction. So I'm just going to add the leaves there with some liquid glue, one on each side of the candle, and the pine cone goes directly in the middle. And then I'm going to add that lid right to the top. And off camera, I'm going to make another jar identical to this one. So in total, there will be 3 jars on this mini slimline card that I'm making, and here is the process for my 3rd jar. So I'm using a temporary adhesive to hold this white outline of the jar onto this background paper, and it's not permanent. Remember, it is temporary. I'm just going for the positioning of this stamp because I'm actually going to stamp a sentiment inside of here. So I'm going to just use my powder tool to add powder to the jar, and then add some Versamark ink and stamp down the sentiment. The sentiment is "Have yourself a merry little Christmas." And then I'm adding some gold embossing powder to the top, and I'll use my heat tool to melt that embossing powder. Next, I'll add the foam piece directly to the top of that red pattern paper. And for the shaker toppings on the inside, I'm going into my stash and grabbing some of the pearls in the gold matte color as well as the silver matte color. I'm also bringing in some of the green crystal gems from the kit. I'm just going to add some powder to the back of the acetate, and then I'm going to add that to the top of that foam piece. And then I will add some glue to the back of the outline piece for the shaker, and then add that directly to the top of that jar. I die cut the lid out of some gold mirror paper in my stash, adding that to the top of the jar, and then I'm going to add some of this black twine. This is sparkle string from Queen & Company. I'm just going to tie that around there a few times and then tie it in a knot on the back of that jar. Snip off the ends so no ends are hanging out of the jar. And then I also tied a small bow in the same black twine and adding that to the right side of that jar with a glue dot. So here are all 3 of the jars that I'm going to use for my card. As I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a mini slimline card. So the card base was a sheet of white cardstock cut to 7 inches by 6 inches and scored at the 3.5 mark on the 7-inch side. And then I have a piece of solid green cardstock that's 5 7/8 by 3 3/8, and a piece of red checkered paper, and that's 5 3/4 by 3 1/4. And then I have a scallop border that is cut out of the same gold mirror cardstock as the jar lid, and that is going to be added to the bottom of that card layer just to keep those jars grounded. So I'm going to add the jars with the candles inside on the left and right side of that card layer. And then the jar with the sentiment is going to go right on top. I am going to put some foam adhesive on the back of the top of the lid just to keep everything flat on the card front, and then add that right there to the middle. And that entire layer is going to go on the mini slimline card base. And the final dimensions for a mini slimline card, it's 6 inches by 3.5 inches. So here's a look at my final card. For my next card, I'm going to be incorporating the gingerbread men and the candy canes and candy pieces again. I just love these dies. So I have my 2 gingerbread men. I have a green one and a red one. And I'm just inking up the edges with some brown ink to make them nice and toasty. Here's my candy cane. For this particular candy cane that you see here, I'm actually putting glue on the front side of the red piece and attaching it to the back side of the white piece, because I wanted these candy canes to be going in opposite directions. I also have some of the candy pieces, which I've already die cut and put together, and then here are a few of the leaves, which I die cut out of some light green cardstock and just inking up the edges with some green ink. This is going to be another mini slimline card. So for my layers, I have a piece of green cardstock, which is 3 3/8 by 5 7/8, and then that red and white stripe paper is 3 1/4 by 5 3/4. I'm also bringing in this die. This is from the Foundation 8 die set from Queen & Company. It has 3 squares that are all connected. And I'm actually going to use this piece as my shaker piece for my card. This card is not going to have the actual jar on it. It's just going to have these little gingerbread and candy pieces. So here I die cut the triple square die out of some white cardstock, and then I just cut down some acetate to size, and then I just put some glue on the back side of that triple square die, and then added the acetate to the back side of that. And then here I'm just taking a piece of foam. It's just a scrap piece of foam, adding it to my acetate piece. So I have these 2 long strips that I add 1 on each side. And then I'm going to cut smaller strips for the middle portion, and I'm going to add those down to the acetate. I am adding some liquid glue to the back side, even though they have double-sided adhesive on them. Just want to make sure that it is extra secure, so that's why you see me adding glue here. When you are adding your foam, make sure that all the foam pieces are connected and there's no holes in the foam or no gaps, because you want to make sure that your shaker pieces don't accidentally fall out of any gaps. So make sure all those foam pieces are connected tightly. So I also took that same die and die cut this polka dot pattern paper to get the middle pieces, and I'm just using some adhesive, and this is actually a non-permanent adhesive, because I knew that I was going to have to reposition it and just wanted to make sure I get them lined up exactly into these windows on this die. So I go ahead and add them, and then you see me just putting that triple square die just over top to make sure I have it aligned perfectly. And once they're all added, I'm going to go into my stash and grab some shaker pieces. These are the confetti shaker pieces from Queen & Company. I have green and red, and I add them to the middles of each one of those squares. And then I add the triple square die right to the top of that. Next, I'm going to start positioning all of these fun pieces. So I have the gingerbread men that are going to be in the center square. I have 2 peppermints on the top, and then some candy cane pieces at the bottom. I also die cut a scallop die from the Foundation 5 die set and stamped out Merry Christmas as my sentiment. And then just adding some glue here to the center of those candy canes to keep them crossed, and then tucking in some of the leaves to the sides of those candy cane. And then once I have everything how I want it, I will just go ahead and add glue and just start positioning everything with the glue and adhering everything down. Now, if you did not want to add foam to this triple square piece, you can just adhere it flat and not make it a shaker, and still put all of these fun little die cuts in the windows of this triple square die. But I chose to make it a shaker piece, which I think is so cute because you have all that confetti showing up in the background. I do add a peppermint to the top of the candy cane just for an extra embellishment. Notice that I'm adding the actual embellishments to the top of the shaker, so just adhering them down to the acetate itself. And then I'm going to add some foam to the back of the scallop on one side only, because the other side will lay flat to that triple square shaker piece. And then I'll add glue and then add that there to my card. I am going to add a few of the confetti shaker pieces as embellishments to the front of the card. And then this is going to actually go on a mini slimline card base. To get your mini slimline card base, you're going to cut a piece of cardstock 7 by 6 inches, then score it at 3.5 inches on the 7-inch side. And here's my completed card. My next card, I'm using the scallop die from Foundation's 10 die set, and then the small rectangle, which will layer perfectly on top of that scallop. That's also from Foundation's 10 die set. So the red pattern paper from the paper pad, it's the swirl paper, and then the scallop is just white cardstock. I also went into my stash and found some white glitter paper that I had, and I die cut the Christmas trees out of that. And I'm also bringing in some black. So I have this banner die that I die cut out of black cardstock, as well as the jar lid is going to be out of the black cardstock. And I also am bringing in the reindeer die that came in the kit, and the reindeer is cut out of some craft cardstock. So I go ahead and add the foam piece for the jar directly to the center of this scalloped piece, and I'm just positioning the Christmas trees and the deer how I want them in the jar, and then I'll just add some glue to the back and add them to the shaker piece. I am adding some brown ink to the edge of the deer just to add some dimension to that deer. And then I'll add glue and add them to the jar. I am bringing in some of the pearl shaker toppings from my stash. These are white shaker toppings. I wanted it to look like there was snow on the ground inside of my jar. And then I'll peel back the adhesive backing of that jar foam piece, and I will add a piece of acetate to the top. And sometimes I do add some glue directly to the foam, even though it has adhesive backing on it. I add some glue just for extra piece of security, which I think I did in this case because I did see some glue pieces, which I did that off camera. Okay, so then I just added the jar outline to the top, and I die cut that out of some silver foil paper, and then I'm just adding some twine. It's some red and white twine around the lid, tying that in a knot around the back, and then I'll add some foam above that twine on the back side of that jar lid, and then I will add some glue and add that to the top of the jar. Next, I have this banner piece, which I added some powder to the top, and then I inked up a stamp with some Versamark ink, wishing you a joyful Christmas, added some white embossing powder, and then heat set that with my heat gun. So for my card layers, I have a piece of red solid cardstock that's 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and then the pattern paper is 4 by 5 1/4. So I add those together, and then I'm going to add the scallop right on top in the middle of those card layers. I will also add the black banner right underneath that jar. I'm going to bring in some snowflake dies. These are from the Holiday Foundation dies. Now there is a snowflake die that's in this kit, but I wanted to bring in different size snowflakes and different styles since I was using several snowflakes. So that's where I got these dies from, and I just die cut them out of some white glitter cardstock, and I'm just adding them there to the jar as well as to the left of the sentiment. I'm going to bring in some of these pearls in silver and add them to the center of those snowflakes, and also bring in the red pearls and add a couple just around the card. And then I'm going to add this entire layer to the front of an A2 size card base, which measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and that completes this card. So for this card, I'm going to bring in a sketch by Queen & Company. And in case you're new to Queen & Company, you may not know that they have card sketches to coordinate with their foundation dies. And here I'm using foundation dies 1 and 3 sets. for this card sketch. And if you noticed, you saw that the card sketch actually had a hexagon die for the center, but I'm just going to change that up because I decided I wanted to use a circle die instead. I just thought the circle die looked better with the jar rather than the hexagon. So I die cut a white stitched circle and I'm adding my jar foam piece right to the center. And I'm also using some of the ornaments, the Christmas ornaments in the kit. Die cut those out of some of the glitter fun foam from Queen & Company. And this fun foam actually has adhesive backing on the back. And there is a die for the top of the ornament. It's a very small die, and I die cut that out of just some silver glitter paper. So I went ahead and put all 3 ornaments together. I'm also inking up the edges of some of the leaves, and I'm adding the ornaments directly to my foam shaker piece. And once that's done, I will go ahead and add the leaves to that. You saw me peel back the adhesive backing for the ornaments. Now it is a sticky backing, but I just like to add some glue to the backside anyway, just for some extra security. So I'm tucking those leaves behind there. Notice that that green ornament, it is on top of the 2 red ones, so it is raised up a little bit. So for my shaker pieces, when I add them, I'm adding them to the top of the ornaments where there's more room for them to shake. I'm making sure that none of those shaker pieces fall down below where the ornaments are, because if they do, then it's going to be too thick for the acetate to go over top and lay flat. So I did die cut the jar outline out of some dark gray cardstock, and then the lid out of some red cardstock, and I was just inking up the edges with some red ink. Added some foam to the top of that lid, and then add some glue to the back as well and add it to the top of the jar. I'm also bringing in this handle and adding that to the top of the jar as well. This red stripe pattern paper, it measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, the same size as the front of an A2 size card base. And then this green plaid paper, it was cut with one of the foundation dies, and it does have stitching around the edges. And then I have this other piece that was also cut with one of the foundation dies, which I added a sentiment using some Versamark ink, and then added some white embossing powder, and I'm just going to heat set that so that it melts the embossing powder. And I really love how that white embossing powder stands out on some of that dark cardstock. So I'm bringing in a reindeer and a Christmas tree. I'm inking up the edges of the tree with green ink, and then the reindeer with some brown ink. I'm also bringing in a scallop, and I'm adding the scallop border to the bottom of this sentiment. So I'm going to go ahead and add that sentiment towards the bottom of the card. I'm going to go ahead and adhere that circle with the jar to the middle, and then we'll add the sentiment strip. And then once the sentiment strip is added, I will add the Christmas tree and the reindeer. Now the reindeer is actually going a different direction. I'm actually putting glue on the back side of the front of the reindeer because I wanted him facing the sentiment and not looking away from it. So I am adding some of these leaves, adding some of the white gel pen just to define those leaves a little bit. I'm going to add those to the top of the jar on the top left. And then we'll add the little berries there. And then I'm going to add a few epoxy dots. So here's a look at the card sketch with the completed card. You can see that I replaced the hexagon shape with a stitched circle shape. And then the 2 circles at the bottom I replaced with a reindeer and a Christmas tree. I also have the sentiment here with the sentiment strip and then the scallop underneath it, same as the card sketch. And then the circle here at the top left, I just added the leaves and the berries on the jar. So if you're ever at a loss for how to design a card, you can head over to Queen & Company's website and you can take a look at their card sketches for their foundation dies. For my next card, I'm adding the foam shaker piece directly to the pattern paper that I cut using the jar die. And once that's added, I'm going to add my reindeer and some snowflakes inside. The snowflakes I die cut out of the snowflake die that came with the kit. So I added a few there. I did put some double-sided adhesive on the back of the white glitter paper before I ran that snowflake through my die cut machine. That way it's easier for those snowflakes to stick to the background. And the reindeer I just die cut out of some black cardstock. I wanted it to look like a silhouette of the reindeer inside of there. And then I just added some of the pearls, which are the shaker toppings from Queen & Company. And then I'm adding the top of the jar outline just in some red solid color cardstock. And then the lid I die cut out of some dark gray cardstock and added some gray ink just for some extra dimension. I am adding the handle to the top of that jar lid. I am using Paper Play Sketch 16 for this card design. And I have some papers here. I have a large piece of black cardstock, which is the matte, which is 3 5/8 by 3 5/8. And then that plaid black and white paper is 3 1/2 by 3 1/2. The red snowflake paper is 2 by 4 1/2. And then the red matte is 2 1/8 by 4 5/8. I also have a scalloped circle that I die cut. And then I'm using an A2 size card base in some red solid cardstock. And then I'm adding a white mat to the top of that, and it's 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. So I'm just going to layer all of these pieces onto the card front. And I really love these colors together, the black, the white, and the red. I think these colors really pop. And I love how this card turns out in the end. So I add the large square to the front, and then I add the smaller rectangle to the top of that, and then the scalloped white circle will be added to the top of that. I have a banner that I die cut out of black cardstock. This is from the Foundations 2 dies, and I'm inking up the sentiment with some Versamark ink. And I'm going to add some white embossing powder onto the sentiment and then heat set that with my heat gun. I love how the white embossing powder really pops on top of that black cardstock. I did die cut some Christmas trees out of some dark gray and light gray cardstock, and I'm just inking up the edges with some gray ink. I die cut 3 Christmas trees, and I was trying to figure out how I can add all 3 of them there to the bottom right hand corner, but I end up deciding just to go with 2 Christmas trees. So I will remove one of those. I did cut off the end of the banner so I could stick it underneath those Christmas trees. So I was just positioning everything there where I wanted it to go. And then I add that banner, and then I'm going to add the Christmas trees on top of that. So I go with the larger Christmas tree in the dark gray, and then the lighter one on top of that off to the left. And then the jar will go to the middle, but before I add the jar, I do add some foam to the lid to make sure that it adheres flat to the card front. I add some red pearls to the front of the card, just for some extra bling. And that's going to complete this card. So here is my completed card, and it's next to the sketch that I used, and you can see how the only thing different I added were the Christmas trees and the banner. So for my last project, I'm making a personalized Christmas ornament, and I'm going to put a photo of my kids inside of the jar. I printed out a color picture and a black and white picture. I want to go with a Christmas theme, so I was trying to figure out if I wanted to do color or black and white. I ultimately decided that the color picture did not go with the red in the Christmas jar that I was making for my ornament, so I ultimately chose to go with the black and white picture. So I'm just taking the jar die and positioning it over top of the picture to make sure I have all of the faces in that jar, and then I put some washi tape down to hold that die in place and ran it through my die cut machine, and now I have the shape cut out of the picture. I also took that same die and I cut a piece of medium weight chipboard. That's just going to make my ornament a little bit more sturdy, and I also die cut a piece of red cardstock. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere the photo to the actual chipboard that I die cut, and then I'm going to add the foam piece just to give it a real tight bond onto the photo. And then I'm going to go ahead and add some of these crystals right inside of the shaker. I add some clear, some green, and some red. I want to make sure that the shaker pieces that I add inside are not too many because I don't want them going over top of my kids' faces when the shaker bits rest at the bottom of that jar. So I do add some powder to the back of the acetate and then add the acetate to the top of the foam. And then I add some glue to the back of the red outline and add that to the jar. I also die cut a pine cone. I'm just poking out the holes to add some dimension to that pine cone and then adding that to a piece of craft cardstock that was cut with the solid die from the pine cone. I also die cut some of these leaves and some of the berries, and I'm just positioning them where I want them to go. I'm ultimately going to put this at the lower left-hand corner of this jar. So I go ahead, once I have them where I want them, I just take some double-sided adhesive tape and tape them to the back of the pine cone. I found that the easiest way to keep them in place where I want them to be and how I want them to be positioned. And then I go ahead and take another leaf and attach it to the right side of this. And then I just add some glue to the back of the pine cone and have those leaves adhere to the pine cone with the glue on the back. So I'm just trying to position it so it doesn't go over the faces. So I just had to maneuver it just a little bit until I have it exactly where I want it to go. And then once I have it where I want it, I'm just going to add some glue to the back side of just the right side because part of it's going to be hanging off the jar and the other part it will be adhered flat to the jar. Next, I'm going to take some ribbon and I just cut a little piece of ribbon and I'm going to adhere it to the back side with some double-sided tape. Next, I'm going to take the red piece that I die cut from the jar die and I'm going to add the year, and I'm using some Versamark ink here to add 2021 and putting some white embossing powder over top of that, and then I will heat set that to melt the embossing powder, and then that piece is going to go right on the back side of this jar. So just peel back the double-sided adhesive tape from the back and then add glue and then pop that right on. Next, I'm going to add my lid, and I die cut 2 lids out of the silver cardstock. So I add one to the front, and then I'm going to turn that over and add one to the back. So it's kind of like a 3-dimensional jar. So you can flip it around and you can see the back side. Next, I'm going to use these Nouveau glitter drops and just add some glitter to the top of the pine cone and some of the leaves. And that will need to dry, but it dries pretty quickly. If you wanted to use your heat tool, you can do that to have it dry even quicker. So here's the completed ornament. And here are all of the projects that I created with Queen & Company's Holiday Jar Kit. So I would love to hear what you thought of these cards and this kit. If you'll leave me a comment down below and let me know which card was your favorite. Once again, all card measurements and supplies will be listed on my blog, and I will have a list of all supplies down in the description box below. A link to my coordinating blog post will also be in the description box below. So be sure to subscribe for more card making tutorials. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day. Bye-bye.